Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today we're diving into a story that's pretty fresh. I mean, it's right out of the headlines.
hmm
It's about the birth of a brand new political party in Bangladesh.
Okay.
It's called the Jatiya Nagorik Party.
Interesting.
Yeah, you might see it called the JMP for short.
Got it.
Or actually, you might even see it called the National Citizen Party,
Okay.
the NCP.
To JMP or NCP?
Exactly.
Gotcha.
But really, what makes this party so fascinating is its origin story.
Okay.
Because it was actually founded by the student activists who led that mass uprising
Oh, wow.
that brought down the government just last year.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's this incredible story of revolution and political ambition,
Right.
and this immense challenge of turning protest energy into real power.
Yeah. What strikes me about the JNP is that they're not just sort of riding the wave of, a successful revolution.
Right.
They're aiming to completely reshape the whole political landscape.
Yeah.
You've got to think about it. This party is trying to bridge this, really deep divide between secular and Islamist factions,
Right.
all while facing off against these like deeply entrenched political dynasties.
Yeah,
It's a pretty tall order.
it is a tall order.
Yeah.
So let's rewind a bit
Okay.
and kind of trace the events that led to the formation of the JMP.
Okay. I'm ready.
Okay, so we'll start in mid-2024 with these student protests
Okay.
over job quota reforms.
Interesting.
And it seems like a very, specific issue.
Right.
But it quickly became a lightning rod for all these broader frustrations with the government.
Exactly. I mean, these students were just fed up
Yeah.
with what they saw as just rampant favoritism and corruption in the system.
Mhm.
And then when the Bangladesh Supreme Court actually annulled the existing quota system in June 2024,
Right,
it seemed like a victory.
right.
But the government's response was anything but peaceful.
Yeah, that's right. There was this brutal crackdown in July 2024.
Yeah.
That a lot of people call it July Massacre.
Right.
And that really ignited things.
Yeah, yeah.
It led to the formation of the anti-discrimination student movement,
Okay.
sometimes called Students Against Discrimination, or SAD.
Gotcha. So SA.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this wasn't just a campus issue anymore. This was
Mhm.
like a national movement.
Yeah, and then from there, the movement just completely snowballed
Wow.
into a full-blown non-cooperation campaign
Wow.
that ultimately toppled the Awami League government on August 5th, 2024.
Wow. So in
Okay.
just a few months, they went from protesting job quotas to bring down the entire government.
I know, it's incredible.
That's incredible.
It is.
What happened after the government fell?
Well, Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus stepped in as chief advisor of
Okay.
this interim government.
Okay.
And he was really trying to stabilize the situation.
Right.
But the student leaders weren't content with just toppling the old regime.
Right.
They formed the Jatiya Nagorik Committee, or the JNC. And it was this broad platform to push for their vision of a new Bangladesh.
Okay, so the JNC was kind of their first step towards formalizing their political ambitions.
Exactly.
What were some of their key demands?
Well, they were demanding justice for the victims of the July massacre,
Right.
calling for serious reforms to address corruption and inequality.
Wow.
And they were even hinting at drafting a new constitution.
Wow.
I mean, these weren't just like tweaks to the system. They were
Mhm.
talking about fundamental change.
That's ambitious.
Yeah.
It sounds like they were really trying to capitalize on that momentum of the revolution
Yes.
to push for these sweeping reforms.
For sure.
And ultimately, that led to the official launch of the Jatiya Nagorik Party on February 28th, 2025.
Exactly.
Wow.
And it's important to understand the leadership structure of the JNP.
Okay.
At the helm is Emma Nahid Islam. He's the party's convener.
Okay.
You can think of the convener as the chief leader, like a president.
Okay.
He played a major role in the July uprising and even served briefly as an advisor to the interim government.
So he's someone who commands respect, both within the movement and in the broader political sphere.
Exactly.
What about other key players in the JMP?
Well, there's Akhtar Hossain. He's the member secretary.
Okay.
And essentially, that's like the general secretary of the party.
Okay.
He handles the day-to-day operations.
Okay.
But what I find interesting is how the JMP's leadership structure really reflects its grassroots origins.
Right. Like, for example, Hasnat Abdullah is the chief organizer for the South,
Right.
while Sarjis Alam is the chief organizer for the North.
Exactly.
Then there's Nasiruddin Patwari, who was deeply involved in the JNC, and he's now serving as the chief coordinator.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you've got Samantha Sharman as a senior joint convener.
Right. It's a diverse group with
Yeah.
people who come from different regions and different student
Well, it's
groups.
a very diverse group.
Yeah, it's a deliberate choice.
Right.
They're sending a message that they're not a party of career politicians or elites. They're the people who are out there on the streets demanding change.
It seems like they're trying to walk the walk, not just talk the talk when it comes to inclusivity.
Exactly.
But what exactly are they hoping to achieve?
Right.
What's their vision for Bangladesh?
Well, at its core, the JNP wants to transform Bangladesh into a truly inclusive democracy.
Wow.
They want to break free from what they see as decades of authoritarian and dynastic rule.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're aiming for a clean break from the past.
That's right.
That's a powerful message, especially for those who are disillusioned with the old political establishment.
Yeah.
But how does their vision translate into concrete policy goals?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's what we're going to get into next.
Perfect. I'm ready when you are.
All right, let's do it. Well, one of their main priorities is justice for the victims of that July 2024 massacre.
Oh, yeah?
They're demanding accountability, and reparations for those affected by the government crackdown.
Yeah.
And this is really deeply personal for a lot of these JNP members.
Yeah, I can imagine.
A lot of their comrades were among the victims.
Yeah, I bet it must be so difficult to
Yeah.
go from, protesting in the streets
Right.
to then trying to, achieve justice
Right.
through the very system that they were fighting against.
It's really a complete 180.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are some of their other priorities?
Well, they're also really pushing for significant constitutional reform.
Okay.
Some members are even calling for a brand new constitution.
Wow.
Drafted by a constituent assembly.
Really?
They argue that the current system is just too flawed,
Mhm.
too entrenched in the old ways of doing things.
A new constitution.
Yeah.
That's a pretty radical demand.
Yeah, when you say.
It's a big one.
Yeah, I'm also curious about their overall ideology.
Right.
Where do they fall on the political spectrum?
Well, they describe themselves as centrist and reformist,
Okay.
focusing on things like, youth empowerment, social justice, participatory democracy.
Yeah.
They're really trying to appeal to this broad coalition.
And, bridge those traditional divides between secular and Islamist factions.
So they're trying to carve out a space for themselves
Yeah.
in a political landscape that's, often defined by those very divides.
Exactly.
It seems like a very delicate balancing act.
Yeah, it is.
So what about specific policies? What are some of the things that they're proposing
Okay.
to, address the concerns that actually sparked the protests in the first place?
Well, one of their key policy areas is education and employment reform.
Right.
Remember those initial protests were sparked by those job quota reforms?
Exactly.
So this is an area where they really need to deliver.
Yeah.
They're advocating for a merit-based system free from the kind of favoritism that fueled those early demonstrations.
So it sounds like they're trying to address the root causes
Mm-hmm.
of those protests head on.
For sure.
Is there anything else?
Yeah, they're also prioritizing anti-corruption measures.
Okay.
They argue that corruption is one of the biggest obstacles to development and progress in Bangladesh.
Yeah.
So they're proposing stricter laws,
Right.
greater transparency,
Uh-huh.
and a more accountable government.
So a focus on education and employment,
Yeah.
tackling corruption,
Mm-hmm.
and these, grand ambitions of constitutional reform
Right.
and this inclusive democracy.
It's a bold vision.
It is. It's a bold vision, no doubt.
Yeah.
But, let's face it, they're facing some serious challenges as well.
Absolutely no political party.
Right.
Especially, a fledgling one born out of a revolution
Yeah.
has a smooth path to power.
Right.
One of the most pressing challenges for the JNP is managing those internal divisions that we were talking about earlier.
Right.
Those leadership disputes
Uh-huh.
and the walkout by some of the student leaders,
Yeah.
particularly those affiliated with Chhatra Shibir, the student wing of Jamaat-e-Islami.
Right.
That's a real red flag.
How significant is this split?
It's definitely a concern.
Yeah.
Jamaat-e-Islami is an Islamist party. Right.
And their student wing leaving really suggests that some within that faction
Yeah.
just don't see the JNP as sufficiently representing their interests.
Right.
The JNP is trying to maintain this, broad, inclusive coalition,
Right.
but they risk alienating those who feel that their specific concerns are being ignored.
So it's like this tightrope walk.
Yeah.
They need to appease various factions within their party
Right.
while also presenting, a unified front to the public.
Exactly.
What about challenges from outside the party?
Right.
I imagine they're facing a lot of pushback
Oh, yeah.
from the, established political players.
Absolutely. The JNP is trying to break into a political system
Yeah.
dominated by two major parties.
Right.
The Awami League, which they just ousted from power,
Right.
and then the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, or the BNP.
Right.
Both of these parties have really deep roots, powerful networks, and vast resources.
So how can the JMP compete against these political heavyweights?
I mean, with their lack of experience and limited resources.
Well, they have a few things working in their favor.
Yeah.
First, they have that incredible grassroots momentum
Right.
and public goodwill that comes from leading a successful revolution. People are really hungry for change,
Right.
and the JNP represents that change.
So they're banking on their image as outsiders.
Yes.
The revolutionaries who are coming in to clean up the system.
Exactly.
But is that enough?
It's a good start.
Right.
But they can't rely solely on their revolutionary credentials.
Right.
They need to articulate a clear and compelling policy platform that resonates with voters, especially those who may be skeptical of a party led by, young, untested activists.
So they're facing challenges from within and outside.
Right.
And they have to prove that they can actually govern.
It's a lot.
How do they tackle that triple threat?
I think a SWOT analysis might help us understand their situation a little better.
Okay, what is a SWOT analysis?
Well, a SWOT analysis is a way to break down, their strengths,
Okay.
weaknesses,
Okay.
opportunities, and threats.
Okay, so there's SWOTs.
They're SWOTs, exactly.
Okay, let's dive in.
Okay, so their biggest strength, without a doubt, is that grassroots momentum that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
They've mobilized a huge segment of the population, and that energy is still very much palpable.
And their youth is a strength too, right?
Exactly.
I mean, they're seen as like a fresh alternative to the, old corrupt political establishment.
They represent a break from the past.
Yeah.
And that's really appealing to a lot of people.
Right.
Especially younger voters who are tired of the same old faces and the same old problems.
Yeah.
They also have this very clear reformist vision, this commitment to inclusion and social justice.
Right.
That sets them apart from the more, established parties.
Okay, so those are some pretty compelling strengths.
Yeah.
But what about weaknesses? You mentioned their lack of experience earlier.
Uh-huh.
How big of a liability is that?
Well, it's a significant weakness.
Yeah.
They've never held public office before.
Right.
So they're going to face this really steep learning curve when it comes to, the nitty-gritty of governing.
Right.
Plus those internal divisions that we discussed.
Yeah.
The leadership disputes and defections.
Right.
That highlights a lack of cohesion
Uh-huh.
and could really undermine their credibility.
Yeah, and I imagine they're facing a resource gap as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Campaigning is expensive.
Yeah.
And they're going up against these parties with deep pockets and, established fundraising networks.
For sure.
So they're going to have to be creative and resourceful in their campaigning.
Right.
Relying on, grassroots mobilization and social media savvy to kind of counter the financial advantage of their opponents.
Exactly.
So they're outspent and outexperienced.
Yeah.
It sounds like a total David versus Goliath situation. Yeah, it kind of is.
But we've talked about strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
What about opportunities?
Right.
What are some of the things working in their favor?
Well, the upcoming elections are a huge opportunity.
Okay.
The political landscape is really in flux. After the revolution,
Right.
voters are more open to change than ever before.
Right.
And if the JMP can run a smart campaign and mobilize their base, they could make a real impact.
So they're in a good position.
Yeah.
Plus, they can tap into that public desire for reform
Yes.
that you mentioned earlier.
Exactly.
People are fed up with corruption, inequality,
Right.
the old ways of doing things. The JNT can capitalize on that frustration by, offering concrete solutions and a vision for a better future.
For sure.
And let's not underestimate the power of the youth vote.
Right.
Bangladesh has a really large and young population, who are increasingly politically active.
If the JMP can connect with those young voters, I mean, they have like a built-in base of support.
Right.
That could really propel them to victory.
Absolutely.
So they have the energy, the momentum,
Right.
and a potential wave of young voters behind them.
It's a potent combination.
It is. It's a potent combination. But what about threats?
Okay.
What are the biggest obstacles that they need to watch out for?
Well, I think the most immediate threat
Okay.
is backlash from the ousted Awami League.
Right.
They still have a lot of supporters and influence within the government and security forces.
Yeah.
They could use that influence to undermine the JNP,
Right.
whether through, smear campaigns, legal challenges,
Right.
or even outright harassment.
So they're facing a potential counter-revolution.
Potentially.
From the very forces they overthrew.
Yeah.
What else should they be worried about?
Well, fragmentation within that broader pro-democracy movement is another major threat.
Yeah.
If the various opposition groups can't stay united,
right,
it'll make it much harder
yeah,
to challenge the established parties and push through those meaningful reforms. So they need to find a way to bridge their differences and work together for that common goal.
What about those high expectations we talked about earlier?
Right.
They've promised a lot.
Yeah.
And if they can't deliver, they risk alienating their supporters and losing that revolutionary momentum.
That's right. They need to be realistic about what they can achieve in, a short time frame.
Right.
They've inherited this, really complex and challenging situation.
Yeah.
It's going to take time, patience, and careful strategizing to bring about meaningful change.
Speaking of challenging situations,
right,
let's not forget about, the broader context in Bangladesh.
Right.
It's a country with a history of political instability.
Yeah.
And the transition to democracy has been anything but smooth.
It's true. I mean, coups, political violence, and crackdowns on dissent. These are all too familiar in Bangladesh.
Right.
The JNP is navigating a very precarious political landscape.
Yeah.
And they need to be prepared for the unexpected.
So we've talked about the internal dynamics of the JNP, their leadership, their vision, and the challenges that they face. But you mentioned earlier that the JNP's emergence is part of a global trend.
Yeah.
I'm kind of intrigued by that. Can you elaborate on that?
Oh, yeah. We've been seeing this surge in youth-led movements all around the world in recent years.
Yeah.
Think about the climate strikes, the protests against racial injustice, the push for economic equality. Young people are at the forefront of all these movements.
Right.
They're demanding change, and they're really challenging the status quo.
Yeah, it's like they're not waiting for permission to shape their own future.
Exactly.
They're taking matters into their own hands. Yeah. And the JNP really fits right into that narrative, doesn't it?
Exactly. They're a prime example of this global trend of young people stepping up and saying, we're not going to accept the world as it is. We're going to fight for a better future.
And it's not just about protesting either.
Right.
It's about coming up with solutions, with new ideas and new ways of doing things.
Yeah.
They're forcing the older generations to listen and to take them seriously.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And what's so inspiring about the JNP is that they've taken that energy from the streets and channeled it into a political movement.
Exactly.
They're trying to change the system from within.
Right.
Which is, incredibly difficult and risky undertaking.
It is.
So they're riding this wave of global youth activism. They've got this compelling vision.
Yeah.
And they're facing some serious challenges. But before we wrap up, I want to go back to those threats we discussed.
I feel almost existential.
They are substantial.
Yeah.
And the JNP can't afford to underestimate them. We've talked about potential backlash from the ousted Awami League and the risk of, the pro-democracy movement fragmenting.
Right.
But there are other threats they need to be prepared for.
Like what?
Well, managing public expectations is a big one.
Yeah.
They've come to power on this wave of hope and idealism.
Right.
And people are expecting results, like really quick results. But governing is complex.
Right.
And it's messy.
Yeah.
And they're bound to make mistakes. They're going to face setbacks.
So how do they navigate that? How do they keep the public on their side when things inevitably get tough?
Well, I think transparency is really key.
Okay.
They need to be open and honest about the challenges they're facing. They need to communicate their plans and their progress very clearly.
Right.
And they need to show that they're learning from their mistakes.
Yeah. That they're adapting and evolving as they go.
So it's not just about having a vision.
Right.
It's about managing expectations, being accountable to the people who put them in power.
Exactly.
What about security threats?
Right.
Bangladesh has a history of political violence and extremism. How can a young, relatively inexperienced party like the JNP protect itself in such a volatile environment?
That's a very real concern, and it's one they need to take seriously. They need to have, really robust security measures in place to protect their leaders and their supporters. And they need to be vigilant in monitoring and addressing potential threats from extremist groups.
It sounds daunting.
Yeah.
It honestly sounds like the odds are really stacked against them.
It's true. They're facing an uphill battle.
Yeah.
But they also have something that a lot of political parties lack, which is, this genuine connection, right?
With the people, a sense of purpose
that transcends, traditional politics.
Right.
They represent a break from the cynicism and corruption that have really plagued Bangladesh for so long.
So despite all the challenges, there's still a sense of hope.
Yeah.
This belief that they might actually pull this off.
Exactly. And whether they ultimately succeed or not, they've already achieved something remarkable. They've shown that change is possible, that even the most deeply entrenched systems can be challenged.
Yeah.
They've inspired a generation of young people to believe in a better future.
And that's a powerful legacy.
It is.
Regardless of what the future holds.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, hope and determination can really make a difference.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Awesome. So the Jatiya Nagorik Party's story, is this testament to the power of youth activism, the importance of bold ideas, and this enduring human desire for a more just and equitable world?
Absolutely.
It's a story that we'll continue to follow closely here on The Deep Dive.
For sure.
We've taken you through the key players, their vision, the challenges they face, and the global context of their emergence.
Yep.
Now it's your turn to ponder the possibilities.
What do you think the future holds for this young, ambitious party?
Right.
Can they overcome the odds and truly transform Bangladesh?
Right.
Or will they succumb to the pressures and complexities of governing?
Those are the questions we want you to consider.
For sure.
As you dive deeper into this fascinating story.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
We'll be back with another fascinating story soon.
Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.